Okay, so I've been asked this question many times throughout my life, and that is, what are the top 3 supplements that have made the biggest difference in my life? Now, this video is going to be slightly, shocking to some people when they hear about the very first one that I'm about to mention, and that is actually the very first one is ashwagandha. Now, for some of you, you may have already heard about my story using ashwagandha, but I'm going to do a recap and I'm just going to remind you what actually happened the very first time that I took ashwagandha. So I do want to mention that when I was younger, I actually got offered a job at a startup, and it was a supplement startup. We were selling nootropics. And back then I was really fortunate because I actually had the luxury of basically reaching out to ingredient manufacturers, and I could order and request a sample of basically any nootropic and any supplement that I wanted for free, right? Because we were doing it for R&D purposes. Now, I did get my hands on KSM66 ashwagandha. They sent 100-gram sample direct from the manufacturer. Now, I will never forget the very first time that I used ashwagandha because it was such a powerful effect from the very first dosage. And this was coming from someone who had experimented with many different supplements and drugs and peptides. This is probably like over the 200th different supplement that I'd tried. So I'd built up a lot of self-awareness. I knew how things affected me. And so I basically took a 150 milligram dose, which is half the clinical dose. Usually it's recommended at 300 milligrams. I took 150 milligrams of ashwagandha KSM66. Within 30 minutes, I remember a full body relaxation effect. I immediately noticed feeling a lot more calm, and I felt like the whole world was I was sort of just floating. And with that came this sense of loss. And what I mean by that is that I felt like it sort of stripped away my understanding of myself. Now, I know that sounds really weird and crazy to think of that, but I do remember it sort of causing this depersonalization effect, and anxiety was massively reduced though. So I noticed that throughout the day and the coming days after continuously taking it, that I didn't have any anxiety. There was no nervousness. I felt really calm. I felt really just at ease, basically. But then after a week or two of continuous dosing, I do remember that certain parts of my experience in life became numb. And when I say numb, I mean that my emotional depth, my pleasure response to things that should be pleasurable, all of a sudden now felt like there was no pleasure for anything. And there was this blanket over all of my emotions. I wasn't able to experience joy. I wasn't able to experience happiness. In addition to that, I couldn't even feel orgasm sensation. So there was a blunting effect on my genital region, like a numbing effect there. And I then, obviously, many, many months had gone by. I knew about the potential for ashwagandha to lower cortisol, but I thought this can't just be a low cortisol symptom. This has to be more far reaching. There must be something else going on. Then I came across a really smart, neuroscientist online, and I actually reached out to him and I asked him, what is ashwagandha doing to my brain? Because I really want to understand why it's eliciting this emotional blunting, this anhedonia effect. He then told me that ashwagandha can potentially mimic the effects of SSRIs. Now, SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They're antidepressants, right? Antidepressants are notorious for most people know about them in the context of they numb one's emotions. Now, ashwagandha does appear to have a similar property to SSRIs, specifically by desensitizing the 5-HT1A serotonin receptor. Now, this might sound like complete gibberish, but this particular serotonin receptor is like the gatekeeper for how much serotonin is released in your brain. And if you desensitize this 5-HT1A receptor, then it can lead to a flooding of excess serotonin in the brain. I then researched, all right, what does it mean if you have too much serotonin? Well, you'll see online, basically, people, they don't feel pleasure. They feel a numbing effect on their emotions. They feel more apathetic. They can't be bothered doing things. They procrastinate more. And then I quickly understood that serotonin is not something that my brain wants more of. In fact, I then realized that dopamine was more important. And by the way, guys, if you have had an experience with ashwagandha that might be similar to mine, leave a comment down below. Let's get a discussion going. On a separate note, after evaluating the effects of serotonin in my brain and understanding the effects, I thought, what would happen if I tried to optimize dopamine? And that is the second compound that's had the biggest impact on my life. That is uridine monophosphate. Uridine monophosphate is a game changer in a very positive way for my overall, well, at least at the time, for my overall verbal fluency, for my confidence, and also for my ability to just get things done. Now, the reason why I was interested in uridine was because there was a couple of studies that indicated that it can increase potassium-evoked dopamine release. So uridine does have a dopaminergic effect. In addition to that, when combined with omega-3s, uridine can actually upregulate dopamine receptor density, which would translate to an improvement in overall dopaminergic tone. And when I did use uridine, I started at about 100 milligrams orally, and uridine definitely woke my brain up. It helped to turn the lights back on. It enabled me to make connections better. I felt like my verbal fluency was a lot better. And I also felt like uridine gave me that kick that I needed to complete my university assessments and projects and assignments. And I kicked ass. Honestly, uridine really helped. Following on from uridine, I then explored other dopaminergics, and that was catawba bark. Catawba was a herb that I discovered on a shaman's forum, basically a website where shamans discuss plant extracts. And after discovering a little bit more about catawba bark, it was being used historically as an aphrodisiac, good for mood, increasing blood flow. I was like really captivated and excited to try it. And again, with catawba, when the very first week that I used it, I felt the typical high dopamine symptoms, which were extremely talkative, extremely excited, very motivated, more outgoing, and an increase in libido. So catawba immediately impressed me, and I was like wanting to know more about the herb as I was experimenting. Of course, at the time, I just wanted to give a lot of my friends and family catawba bark to trial, and some people reported like dramatic improvements in overall mood. So that's not surprising, since catawba bark is considered to be an antidepressant. Although it's unique in its antidepressant effects, it's more so targeting the dopamine system instead of the serotonin system. Well, there is some theories that catawba bark actually acts as a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. Some of the compounds and the alkaloids found within catawba bark might actually possess this dopamine reuptake inhibitory effect. So catawba bark definitely stood out to me, and it had an immediate effect on my biology, to the point where I was like, okay, this is incredible. This herb can replace rhodiola, it can replace ginseng, ashwagandha, it can replace shilajit, tonkat ali in terms of its mood and energy boosting effects. So that was definitely the third and final herbal supplement, or I guess supplement overall, that had the biggest impact on my quality of life. And again, guys, if you do want to know something really important about catawba bark, many catawba barks on the market are actually fake. Now, it's very difficult to source high quality, pure, authentic catawba bark. Now, over the years, it took me many, many months of experimenting and also sending it off to get it third-party tested. I found a supplier within Brazil, and I actually decided to release it as my very first supplement under my brand, In Before Sups. Now that will be linked in the video description down below, the catawba bark. We called it Catwa Pure. So the Catwa Pure, we recommend 1200 milligrams per serving, which is 3 capsules. At the time that I was experimenting with catawba bark, I was using about 600 milligrams. So 1200 milligrams should be enough for most people. So if you are interested in actually trialing catawba bark, you can definitely try that one. I'll leave it linked down below in the video description. But otherwise, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.